Today we interviewed Carmin from the podcast Adventure.exe to see how he runs his game as a DM, and he tells us a little about himself. Enjoy.
My name is Aziz. I'm from the Idiots and Dragons podcast. Soon to be. We haven't recorded an episode yet, but we are doing an interview with Carmin from the podcast Adventure.exe. Say hi.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
So, Carmin, it's really great to do this interview with you.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. We met at Fan Expo along with Roy. That was my friend that was with me. So yeah, it's really great to finally get an interview with you. So let me just start off with a simple question. How you began playing D&D?
I began in 1995. I was introduced to the card game Magic the Gathering by a friend, and I was at the library looking for Magic the Gathering strategy guides. And the library by my house kept all the D&D books on the shelf above all the Magic, like deck builders guides and strategy guides and stuff. And so I was curious about it. I took home a player's handbook and I think the monster manual because it had like cool monster pictures in it. And I've been hooked ever since.
How do you approach DMing?
Usually I start with, I usually just start with like an idea, whether it is maybe a plot hook, like there's a werewolf that's been, killing someone every night. I began a campaign like that, or just maybe even with an item, like I see something cool on a model or on TV or something, like a sword or a crown or something, and I go from there. Like where is this item? Why is it there? Who made it? Things like that, and then these stories can evolve from there. And I like to think of a lot of my stories as sort of happening in the background, and the players in the adventure or the campaign, if it's a longer one, are sort of find themselves involved with this background plot that's going on, and that sort of lets me create a story that sort of happens whether the players are there or not, and kind of makes it seem a bit more authentic, like it's actually would be something you'd see in the world. And the first role-playing game I ever ran was actually not D&D. It was Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which had a much darker tone than Dungeons & Dragons, and you played not so much like this like a wizard or a fighter, things like that. You actually had a career. So you were a boatman or a butcher or like a rat catcher is like a famous one. And so it has that very downtrodden like element to it. And then you're sort of thrown into this mess and usually of politics or some weird occurrence happening in the world, and sort of left to solve it yourself. And so I guess I've always carried that with me in my D&D games. I always like to think of average people accomplishing like really great things.
Another thing I want to talk about is characters. When you start a campaign, let's say you have this group of players, how does that process usually look like for you? Do you like, all right, everyone, give me your backstory by blank, blank, blank. I want to intertwine it with the story, and we'll be on our merry way. The session's going to be starting then. Or do you like having character sheets presented the day of? And with these crazy, unique backstories, the day of, and you don't have time to intertwine them, but you kind of do it as you go.
I like to call them session zeros. That's actually, it's a term that's commonly used. But I like when I play with my weekly group that I play with just for fun, not for the podcast or the DM and Dine or anything like that. We always, when we begin a campaign, we have a session zero, and we all sort of get together and the dungeon master will sort of say what they are planning with this campaign, like what the tone is going to be like, or kind of the area of of whatever world it will take place in, and then the players will all come up with character concepts they've had, and people will come to the table with an idea, and you sort of bounce off each other and say, well, maybe my northern barbarian won't really work where we're playing, so maybe I'll change it to be like he's a ranger that's been living on the land kind of thing. So, and yeah, usually we'll not play the session zero. We'll just sort of create our characters. We'll bring blank character sheets and rule books, and we'll create our characters as we talk. But I have in the past been like, I'm running this campaign, bring whatever character you want. And that's a little tougher to have a sort of a cohesive tone, because people will bring disparate characters who have different ways that they want to work with one another. And it can also be fun to kind of roll with the punches and improvise a lot more in that regard. But if I have my way, I love the session zero where we all get to sit down and discuss what kind of campaign we all want to play.
All right, so next one. I personally, this is my arch nemesis of things I have to do as a DM. Not because I don't enjoy it, but because it's really difficult. Voices.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so how do you do lots of voices?
I do lots of voices. I like voices. I like doing accents. Obviously I sort of, I don't do like offensive accents, but there's tons of like accents and affectations you can add to an NPC, and that sort of lets them feel alive in the players' minds. And it also kind of differentiates them when you're if you have no other way of differentiating the NPCs. Like I actually don't use, I know a DM who uses character cards with different portraits on them. And that would actually be a great way to kind of put a picture in your brain about what this character is about. But I find I love doing accents and voices. You can really ham it up and just have a good time with that stuff.
Yeah, it's because for me, doing voices is really difficult because like before I started DMing, there wasn't a lot I did with my voice. Like even in like private or just joking with friends, I wouldn't like, try and do like funny accents, try and change my voice a lot. So then when I was put in the position of DMing, the first major issue with my DMing skills was my NPCs. They weren't forgettable. They did remember them, but they couldn't differentiate them. Like I couldn't just like, have an NPC burst out into the party and say, hey guys, it's me, without them like literally just introducing themselves by name. So that was really, I feel like if I did voices, I could easily like, forgo, the introduction, like, hey, that like that's as soon as you hear the first word that comes out of their mouth, they're like, oh, it's that guy from that town. Yeah. So it's like really, it's something I'm trying to work on, but it's not something I've made a lot of progress on.
If that, and like if you're not comfortable doing things like voices, there are like a ton of other things you can do to sort of make your NPCs memorable. You can add descriptive affectations, like maybe as the player, as you're describing what this NPC is saying, you can say that they they always like maybe squeeze their index finger against their thumb, or like they talk with their hands. You can add in those descriptors, and that will also sort of stick out in your players' brains.
Railroading. So how do we feel about that? I default to it being undesirable. You can use it to set things up and to really build party cohesion, because you're throwing these players at an encounter, you're throwing them at another one, you're making them kind of follow these characters,
making them kind of sounds like you're strong arming them. I mean, like sort of giving them limited options, and that can sort of get the ball rolling a bit. But yeah, generally I err away from railroading. I've played in some pre-written campaigns that had some railroading to it, and like I said, they were good to sort of get things started, and then they opened up a little bit. But I generally err away from it. I always write my adventures and campaigns to be very open and like have players have options.
Thank you for spending this time to talk about Dungeons and Dragons with me.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
So thank you so much. And I think that'll be it.
Awesome.
We hope you enjoyed that. It was really fun talking with him and seeing what he thought about DMing. And don't forget to check out their podcast, Adventure.exe, in the description. I'm the Dungeon Master, signing off.